Hey, what's up, YouTube? My name is Professor. Wait, hold up. I still have my headphones. Oh crap! Give me a second for to put these down. Ooh, did not realize I was still listening to music. Hey, what's up, YouTube? My name is Professor X, and welcome to The Link. Here on my channel, I like to focus on all of the important areas of our lives: our friendships, our relationship with God, and our God-given purpose, and to present Christ as the missing link to bring everything together. Today, we are capping off our series on perfectionism with a subject that is very needed for us. And today, we're talking about trusting God. So, to recap on what we have learned already, when we talk about perfectionism, a lot of times we're dealing with roots in pride, a lack of gratitude, and a lack of trust in God. And when we think about a lack of trust, we have to go back to what perfectionism really is. A lot of times is when people place very high expectations on themselves, very often unrealistic expectations, and it causes them to search for some kind of perfection, make sure everything is done right, make sure everything is done perfectly. And under circumstances like that, a lot of times you can find one or two things occurring. You can either find a situation where someone takes forever to get started on something because they're trying to get everything in place, everything in line, all their ducks in a row, all of the systems in place before they even take the first step. So then procrastination comes into the picture. Or you can have a situation where the person thinks that their way is the only way, so they don't trust anyone else to handle a certain situation, because in their mind the only way they can reach perfection is if they do it their way and how they have learned it. No one else knows it like they do, so they must do it themselves. Now, the issue is when you carry this to your relationship with God, it can cause quite a few negative effects. So me personally, what I've noticed is that it can tend to manifest for me in two other ways, and I'm hoping that some of you can relate to this. One way that it can manifest for me is where I get a call from God to do something, but I take so long to get to it because I'm trying to make sure everything is in place. But the thing with that is that it almost comes from a place of insecurity. Because when I look at my circumstances, I don't see perfect circumstances. I don't see all the money that I need to get these things done, or the resources and all those things. So I take forever trying to amass these things, trying to amass these circumstances so that I could finally feel worthy to be used by God. Because in my mind, the only thing God can use or even look at is perfection. So I have to make sure things are in place. I can't just go on what I have now, because how could God use that? Another way that I find it manifesting for me is excessive control. So when you notice that God is doing things His way and you're losing control over a certain circumstance, you may pull back. Or should I speak for myself? I may pull back or say to myself, I can't do it God's way because He's doing all of these things that go against what I think should be done. So I need to do it my way. I need to trust myself. I can't pray anymore. I can't seek God anymore, because if I want this to be done right, I need to do it. And it manifests itself in almost becoming a bit of a control freak. Now, in both scenarios, none of them served me well. In the first instance, I'd be doing this and that and the third, being a total busybody, but not actually doing things of meaning, not actually producing anything, not actually putting anything out there, but slaving over an idea, working on that, working on this, working on the next, but it still sits there catching dust. And in the other instance, I find myself with enormous amounts of stress, trying to do everything myself, trying to do everything my way, and I carry a burden that does not even need to be mine, but because I think I need to do it, and because I know everything apparently, I take on weights that belong to God and end up buckling under it if I don't do something about that. And I could imagine for those of you who are watching who also have a few struggles in perfectionism can relate to some of this. Maybe you've received the calling from God, but you're trying to get everything in order and it's taking you a long time. Or it could be a situation where you believe that God is going to just I don't know. It's kind of funny how we think that God is going to mess things up if we leave everything to Him. So we need to do it ourselves. We need to trust our own way. But that brings along with it frustrations and just stress that is not even ours. So then when we think about this, the question becomes, what is the solution? Right? Because either way, we end up in situations that are not profitable. When we think about that, the solution that we have to embrace is, one, admitting weakness, that we are not perfect individuals. And the second part is complete surrender to God's will. No matter how talented we are or how gifted we are in an area, there's always a blind spot to us because we're human. And so God knows infinitely more than we do, to know that when we encounter certain decisions or certain paths or certain crossroads, there are paths that seem obvious to us, but God knows that if we choose that path, it would lead to harm. Or there may be paths that aren't so obvious to us, but God knows if we choose that one, it might lead to success. And so that is why surrender to God in wisdom, surrender to God in making decisions can often yield more fruits, because God knows what we can't even conceive. And when we think about where we come from or the circumstances we find ourselves in, God is a master at taking what other people would see as insignificant or not prepared or not educated and use it to do great and inconceivable things. And there are two people that I want to use to emphasize these points. The first one is Gideon. We may be familiar with the story of Gideon, someone who God used to deliver Israel from the Midianites, using an army of only 300 men to defeat an army of over 100,000. Right? That was an absolutely incredible feat. Now, what we need to understand about Gideon is that he was from a very low tribe. He was from the tribe of Manasseh, who was the son of Joseph, right? And when we think about importance, especially back in those times, it was usually the firstborn that took rights, and then the birthright would kind of disperse itself further and further down the line. Now, Manasseh was a grandchild, right? So Gideon is not necessarily coming from an upscale tribe. He's not coming from upscale circumstances. Gideon is literally hiding from the Midianites, trying to extract wheat, right? And God calls him a mighty man of valor. Now, obviously, he did not feel qualified. Obviously, he did not feel like he had the skills. But God said, I will deliver Israel through your hand. And so God used him even in his lowly state to deliver Israel from such a treacherous enemy. Someone else that I want to use as an example is King David. Now, we know King David to be a mighty man of God, a mighty warrior who did all of these feats. But when we go further down in David's life, we see an area of weakness. And this is when he faced a huge enemy, and instead of trusting God's power, he decided to count the people of Israel so that he can measure his own strength. He approached this battle with worldly knowledge, with worldly methods, and God was not pleased with it. So he told David, because you have not trusted in me, I am going to give you 3 choices of punishments that's going to happen to Israel. And David chose a plague, and it took out many people, to the point where David was grieved within himself for trusting his own way. Now, I believe that we can learn very valuable lessons from these 2 stories. Now, starting with Gideon, what I think God is telling us is that he does not need us to be perfect in order to use us. Some of us may feel inadequate because of our upbringing and because of where we came from. Maybe we came from low-income homes. Maybe we came from fatherless homes. Maybe we came from dysfunctional families. And we feel as if because we've gone through all of these things, because of the trauma we've gone through, maybe some of us didn't get the best education. Maybe some of us grew up in very impoverished circumstances. So we think because of that, God couldn't use us. Or maybe some of us have done wrong. Some of us have been in prison. Some of us may feel convicted. Some of us may feel as if we've done so wrong according to God's law that there's no way he could possibly even want to use us, right? But over and over in the Bible, we see examples of God using unlikely men to do great things, because what God is looking for, right? God is not looking for people that just do great things and then they give themselves the credit. He is looking for people who are humble enough to know that when they achieve great things, they are going to give God the glory, because they know it was only Him that could have done it. So even though we may not come from perfect circumstances, one of the reasons why God is still calling us is because He wants people who will say it was because of Him. Also, to that point, that means that God will provide. He will take on the extra responsibilities that are out of our control to make sure that His call comes to pass. Gideon only used 300 people, but God provided the supernatural strength to pursue after such a large army and the strategy to defeat them, right? So even though we may not have all of the things together, that does not mean that we cannot move forward. If God is calling us, then now is the time to move, because God is going to supernaturally provide everything that we need to continue moving from faith to faith, from glory to glory, and from achievement to achievement, so that we can see His power and know that He is with us. The second lesson that we can learn from David's life is that God knows much more than we do. So we cannot rely on our own strength when we're looking to achieve purpose. Because as I said before, there's only so far that we can see. We may like this business partner, we may like this deal, but God knows that further down the road, this person might betray us. God knows further down the road that the fine print of the contract may be more complicated than we're seeing in the moment. And so if we trust God's way, even if He calls us to do things that are outside of our comfort zone, He will provide and He will do His thing. What we need to trust God to do is to do His part. God is not a man that is slack. God is not a man that is slothful. When we ask Him to do certain things, He is faithful and just to do it, especially if it aligns with His will, right? So the thing about trusting God is that it is not easy, because God often calls us to do things that do not make logical sense, right? He may ask us to pray over something. He may ask us to stand in a certain place, say a certain thing, speak to a certain group of people that in our logic doesn't make any sense. It's not relevant to what we think is important. But when we just obey, we will see things that we could not conceive before. When we look at the Bible and we look at the men who did not ask questions, Moses, yes, he asked questions at the beginning, but along the journey, he learned to just follow what God said, right? And when we look at the things that Moses did, he parted the Red Sea, he caused the staff to turn into a snake, he caused water to come out of a rock. All of these things he did by just following God's commands. So if we can learn to do the same thing, there are certain mountains, certain walls, certain boundaries, certain barriers that will begin to move, because we are allowing God's power to intervene in our situation. So that is it for me today, guys. Basically, the message from today is that God is powerful enough to be trusted. He does not need us to be perfect. He can make up for our insecurities and our weaknesses. For the Bible says that when we are weak, then we are strong, because God's strength is perfect in weakness. And we need to know that God is greater than us. We have no rights to pride. We have no rights to do things on our own accord, because God knows what we do not, and He has power over things we do not. So He can be trusted because He has the resources in His hands. And so my prayer is that we learn to trust God. We learn to submit, to surrender to Him. And I'm with you on this journey, because this is one of the hardest things that I've ever tried to do. Right? Perfectionism often lets you believe that you have it together, that you have it all figured out. But life reminds us, and the Bible reminds us, that God is the one that has all of the keys. And so may we trust Him with our lives and see Him do marvelous things within it. And so guys, I hope that this content has blessed you. If it has, I pray that you would leave a like and also consider subscribing down below. But until next time, I pray that you stay blessed and that you stay in His presence.